This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
So today is Friday, June 14th. This is the second day of our four-day sesshin here at Endless Path Zendo. And today I'd like to resume reading and commenting slightly on Throw Yourself into the House of Buddha, the life and Zen teachings of Tangen Harada Roshi, a newly published book from a Zen person that in our lineage we have a particularly close relationship with. So we left off where he first meets Tangen Harada Roshi, and what he's told there is very, very, very strong. He's saying, if you can really commit yourself to seeking this truth, to this one important thing, then you can stay here. But if you are not earnest and sincere, if your commitment is lukewarm, you won't be able to make a complete whole commitment. If you won't be able to make a complete whole commitment, then you can go home now. And again, the point to keep in mind is that he's speaking as a monastic teacher to a student with a very, very strong aspiration and very difficult life circumstance, real questions, and that these are people who will be monastics. They're not lay people. They don't have families, they don't have relationships, they don't have work, careers. The one great matter is always in their face and gives them no peace. So he was speaking to a particular student, and he was a particular kind of teacher as well. Kapleau-Roshi, who really revered Harada Roshi, really could only stay 3 years at his monastery, and after that he began practicing with the lay teacher, Harada Roshi's disciple, Yasutani Roshi, in a lay community. And Kapleau-Roshi then got married, had a child, and that's how his practice matured. So again, it really depends on the karma and the personality of both teacher and student, how this will take form. So, Tangen Roshi goes on. When Tangen Roshi laid down these conditions, I vowed then and there to awaken to truth, to come to realize my true nature. I had no doubts. There was no question that I would make that commitment. I had already resolved to give my life more than once in the war, so putting my life on the line wasn't a problem for me. When I heard his words, I was ready and willing to practice, and I answered from the bottom of my heart, I will give it my all to practice, just as you show me. I will never forget the look in his eyes at that time when he stared right into me, this kid, still well behind in years, who knew nothing, as I vowed to follow his teaching. His eyes were small and black as coal. How they shone when he said simply, you may stay. The way is one. You follow this one way, this one practice. Don't allow your valued judgments to enter into it. Be a pure white sheet of paper. Let go of everything. That is the only way. Of course, for us as lay practitioners, this is the great benefit of periods of sesshin, where we can let go of everything. The sesshin is organized simply to help you do that. To let go of everything. It doesn't mean push away things. It doesn't mean suppress them. Whatever is you that emerges out of your choices, decisions, your life. But it does mean you can let it go. You don't have to hold on to it protectively, which is often what we do in life. It's a complex world. But in sesshin, you can let everything go and just give yourself to the practice. It's a great opportunity, and it works extremely well for lay practitioners. So, to go on. What good fortune that I was able, when you can get to Sesshin. Now, that's the difficulty. That's the proviso for lay practitioners. We have responsibilities, and we can only get to Sesshin at certain times. So when you're there, do your best. And I found I was so used to 7-day Sesshin in Rochester and with Tangen Roshi as well. When I started working for a while with Tangen Roshi, I found that 4-day Sesshin, which is what he was doing a lot of the time, were great. They were great as a lay practitioner, and his practice is entirely lay. It's Diamond Sangha practice. It's a lay practice. There's no ordination whatsoever, no monasticism whatsoever. Though Tangen Roshi did have residence at Pololo, their center in Hawaii, but they were never ordained. In any case, 4 days is great because 7 days kind of is a long time to be gone, and then it's a long time getting back into the swing of things. But 4 days can be really powerful. You just come in and give it your all, and then you can let it go when those 4 days are over and start re-emerging into your life. So every practice has its ways, and everything has its strengths and weaknesses. We're in a 4-day Sesshin. And anyway, Tangen Roshi. What good fortune that I was able to still be alive. Remember, his life was close to the edge many times when he was young during the war. To hear his teaching, to receive his guidance. From then on, I did give it my all. Of course, my practice was still greedy, immature, far from perfect, but I practiced just as I was instructed, doing each one thing. This one thing, I poured my entire being into it. I hurled myself into Zazen without knowing anything about ordination, without even considering the possibility of becoming a monk myself. I simply tried to listen to the teachings and my teacher's instructions without adding on my own ideas. In this way, I could hear his teachings with a deep familiarity and respect. Then the November session came and I was given the koan mu. Tangen Roshi told me, give your life to this one mu till everything becomes mu. Do not give your energy to anything else, no matter what arises. Neither grasp it nor reject it. Just be this one being. Do this one doing. Stay centered in your tonden, that's the hara area, a couple of finger widths below the navel, and just do mu. The hara is a very Japanese thing. It appears in the martial arts, in calligraphy, a sense of dropping out of your head and bringing your attention down to your lower belly. And there's a groundedness, a rootedness, a steadiness that does come from this. When we're just in our heads, we move with every thought. It's restless, this is monkey mind. It grabs at everything. But allowing our breath, our awareness to settle lower down creates a steadiness and an expansiveness. You can let things go by. You don't have to react to everything. So there's a real value to this. However, often in Western Zen, it's become a kind of bête noire. It's like this bugaboo. Like, I've got to do that. I've got to have hara. I've got to be down in my tonden. And Tangen Roshi really didn't seem to have any interest in that whatsoever. He never, in my time, I've never seen him write about it. I've never heard him speak about it. Pay attention to your practice. Allow it to settle. Sure, these things are helpful, but don't turn it into some kind of power play where that becomes more important than the inquiry, the breathing of the practice, the breathing of each koan, the breathing of mu. It's a useful ally, but you can really get yourself tangled in knots. In fact, Harada Roshi at one point said something about how he really created a lot of intestinal distress for himself, focusing his mind in his hara when he was young, pushing it. So there's an ungraceful and forceful slip-up that can happen. One way to get around sort of that issue is to allow the attention to settle in your hands are in Zazen Mudra. The left hand is above the right. So you can allow your mind or attention, let's say, to settle in the left hand, in the palm of the left hand. So that's low down, but you're not futzing around with your guts, so to speak. And that may make it a little simpler. Then again, people have done good zazen with their attention focused between their eyes. It really depends what's going to work best for you. But certainly, there's a long tradition of focusing the mind in the hara, in the lower belly, and tremendous benefits do come from it, but if it's not done right, it can be counterproductive as well. In any case, I gave myself to Mu, he said. During that first session, I sat next to the president of a big candy company. He'd been working hard at his practice for 10 or 20 years, but his mind's eye was still not open. So he was pouring himself into it with a ferocity that was contagious. When the monitor would pass behind him, he would invariably gasho and ask for the kiyosako, and I followed his guidance in receiving it. He was a great example for me. How fiercely I was struck over and over, and the atmosphere of the Zendo was electrifying. Everyone was so intensely devoted. The power of the one, the power of the group. I hope I wasn't an obstacle to anybody in my enthusiasm, but at that time the only thing on my mind was doing what Tangen Roshi had told me to do, just staying with this one thing. In the evening we had a 20-minute period in which we were allowed to do Mu out loud. How this 60-year-old man beside me burned, his entire being becoming Mu, this one Mu. I remember so well the intensity of his practice, how it touched me. Having just received the koan Mu, I was determined to give my life to it. I had no thought of, can I do this practice? Or how do I do this practice? Or am I doing this practice right? Rather, from the depths of my gut, I threw myself into this Mu, only Mu. And that very session, Mu opened its door to me. Without calculation, I became one with Mu. Everything became Mu. The oryoki bowls, those are the stacked set of bowls that you eat rather than having dishes and serving. The food is passed down the line, and we each had, when I was in Denver, we each had these bowls that would nest. You wrap them beautifully, it makes like a lotus shape, and then you set them out, and there's a tea bowl and a rice bowl and a main dish roll. Bowl rather, not roll. And those are the oryoki bowls. On the shelf before me became Mu, one with me. One with me. Everything stepped in and was me. My face before my parents were even born. Not my idea of myself. Not the self that I've built up a narrative since I was probably about 4 years old. My original self, my face before my parents were even born. That me. That me. What are its boundaries? The bowls stepped in. They were me. No matter what I saw or heard, it was just this one Mu. There was no other response, no other. Everything was Mu. Mu mountain, Mu ocean, great Mu skies, tiny Mu stone, tiny Mu ant. There was nothing that was not Mu. When I took that Mu to Tangen Roshi, he told me, so now your practice begins. How right he was. He cautioned me still more strictly, not yet, stay with it. Do not try to lay back and rest in your experience. Do not become complacent. Stay with this. Always new, always fresh. Carry on, carry through. If I became arrogant or complacent, he would not tolerate it. He would growl and shout at me to go deeper still. He obviously, Harada Roshi was a very strong, very strict teacher, very Japanese. And he really pushed his students who he felt could handle it to their utmost. That was his whole way of working. And obviously, for Tangen, it was exactly the right way. For someone else, it might not have been. So again, we can't just apply this and think this is how it's supposed to be. And in fact, later on in this book, not too far ahead, Tangen Roshi himself talks about how imitating what he went through would not work at all. It was his path, and there was a reason for it. So, after the November session, we did Rohatsu. And then the following year, I attended a great precept ceremony where we heard talks on Shishogi, which is Dogen's precept writing, especially for lay practitioners. I was able to take lay precepts and was given the name Kaien Shinko. My resolve to do Zazen became stronger and stronger. On the first day of each session, we were told, those who have resolved to break through during this session make gasho. I had made up my mind, of course, to go for it, so my hands would always come together. By the way, this whole thing, this language of breaking through, it's pretty prevalent in Zen. And it has its points. But Eiken Roshi really questioned it. Is that really what happens, he said? Who breaks through to what? He preferred the term intimacy, where the world steps in. You're intimate with everything. Remember that moment where Tangen Roshi yesterday had this wonderful experience before he ever knew anything about Buddhism or practice. And he's on this mountaintop and he goes running down and he picks up this little stone and he holds it in his hand and says, be strong, be good, or be strong, be bold. And then he goes, good, good, he says to the stone and puts it down. Intimacy. Who breaks through to what? It seems like there's some person there that then breaks through to something and grabs all this stuff. But that's not actually what happens, as far as I can tell, and Eiken Roshi seemed to be pointing to the same thing. The world steps in, Dogen said, to push the self forward to become one with the 10,000 things is called delusion. When the 10,000 things step in and realize themselves as the self, this is intimacy or realization or enlightenment. So again, there's a certain flavor to this which may be very Japanese, and we have to see through that. But appreciate it too. It was in the culture for a long time, and a lot of people benefited from it. In any case. But we couldn't get by carelessly making gasho, whether we meant it or not. If you did gasho at that time, it meant you were prepared to give your life in practice. You would break through even if it cost you your life. You weren't permitted the luxury of that gasho unless it was life or death. The Zendo was set up to make sure we didn't look off from our practice. The head of the Zendo was Tangen Roshi, but he was not there with us most of the time. We had other Zendo leaders who were very strict, and at any given time, several monitors patrolled the hall, ready to strike anyone who was looking off in distraction. The sound of the kiyosaku could always be heard cracking, urging us to stay with it, to remain attentive to our practice. From the first round of the morning to the last round at night, we were given no slack. The atmosphere was taut. When we become sleepy, foggy, or unclear, the encouragement was always there to get clear and stay firm. Well, as you know, as a lay teacher and as a lifetime lay practitioner, and in fact, most lay teachers, in fact, even more than lay teachers these days, rarely use the kiyosaku. Most students are lay students. And as I said yesterday, lay people tend to get hit enough in life. There's always the unexpected house repair that you didn't see coming. There's the sickness you didn't see coming. There's the child that's having difficulties in our challenging and hard world. You always wanted them protected, but you can't. Things happen, and lay people bring this understanding with them into their practice. We do this because this is who we are. I don't feel we need added pressures. Of course, there's a place for rules and strictness in sesshin in terms of how the sesshin works so that things can move smoothly and without impeding on one person, creating, I don't know what the word would be, but in any case, so that it flows smoothly. That's the reason for the rules, so that everyone can do their best in their practice. But in terms of this extra kind of pressure, and believe me, we had that in the early days in the 70s. Anyone who was in sesshin in the 70s remembers the crack of the kiyosaku all day, the shouts of moo, the screams, the walking on stones and bare feet in the middle of winter in a Rohatsu sesshin. I mean, we did all that stuff, and all I can say is it had its time and its place. But that's not how we need to approach things now, unless that's who you are and it works for you. But it doesn't need to be a style. So I remember going for Doksan with Tangen Roshi. He could be really frightening. He never smiled. With just a phrase, one word from him, sweat would pour down my back. One day I remember going into Doksan and I sniffed through my nose. I was intending to be practicing wholeheartedly, and that sniff was part of it. But it must have been posturing, wholehearted practice. "What's this? Coming here to sniffle," he growled at me, and immediately rang me out before I'd even finished my prostrations. Now, this is very monastic practice. I can't ever see this happening for a lay practitioner. We have a very different relationship with the teacher, with the practice, with our life. In any case, this is what Tangen needed. And it was a match with him and Harada Roshi. They were on the same wavelength. He rang me out before I'd even finished my prostrations. If I didn't put myself into it 100%, I was not allowed to come into that room, the Doksan room. An instant of carelessness, grasping or holding, and immediately, clang, 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 I was out. I often thought, he sure can see it like it is, can't he? When Tangen Roshi would come into the Zendo, he would walk around hitting everybody with the kiyosaku himself. He would shout, "You have all your meals provided for you, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Your futon is ready for you to rest, and you can sleep at night. So what are you dawdling over? Get on with it." And then this long stick would fall on our shoulders 4 or 5 times during each round of Zazen. I would ask for the kiyosaku when the monitor would come by, and I would feel the blow from the tip of my head right down to the tailbone. It was easy to be zealous. At night, after the last round of Zazen, I would go to the graveyard or to the forest or mountain and do mu. In wintertime, if I would grow sleepy during night sitting, yaza, after the formal sitting had ended, I would break a hole in the ice of the pond and jump in, then go back and continue my sitting. I made efforts in a way that I would not want anyone to try to imitate. I thought I would concede my very life for the sake of Dharma. Now there's a point here. Don't imitate him. But in terms of your own life, really do give your all. It really does make a difference. There really is something to realize. There really is something to let go of and allow to fall away. And each of us has the capacity to wake to our own mind. How far away can your own mind be? Hakuin had a great paragraph somewhere about if it was far off in China or India, maybe then you'd have reason to mourn and grieve. But it's closer than close. You don't have to travel very far. Just put yourself fully into the practice you now have, without forcing, without pushing anything away. Just give yourself to it. We have only 2.5 days left to do this in this session. That is not to say it was always easy for me. I struggled mightily, but I stuck with the practice, the one single way of practice. I made no excuses for myself. I did not allow my practice to fade from feelings of discouragement. So Tangen had feelings of discouragement too. Someone as gifted as he was had discouragement in his practice. We're not alone, whatever we're going through. Believe me, if you look at the life of the Buddha, you'll see, I can imagine how discouraged he must have felt after all those years of austerities, getting himself not enlightened, but near death. He put himself totally into it, and it didn't work. And yet it laid the foundation for the middle way and the deepest, as far as we know, in our world cycle, the deepest awakening, but a balanced life. So anyway, yes, I struggled mightily. And there were times when I did not allow my practice to fade when I was discouraged. There were rough times, even times when I thought I was not going to live through it. There were times when I could no longer breathe, times when all went dark before my eyes, times when I thought I was going to pass out. I wore myself out until I was exhausted. I thought I would die from unyielding effort. It was that rough, that trying, but I refused to look away. I did not involve myself with anything else, only followed my teacher's instructions. I have to mention as a caution that giving my all to this practice, I went overboard. What a surprise. And ruined my health. That was not good. So Tangen Roshi told me to leave Hoshinji until I had recovered. While I was ill, I was blessed to meet and develop an acquaintance with Tenshu Nakano, an older monk and student of Tangen Roshi, who took me under his wing and cared for me in his temple. That monk skillfully led me to become a monk myself. So when I got better, I returned to Hoshinji and was ordained a monk by Tangen Roshi on November 8th, 1949. So he had lived through the war by many odd circumstances, felt tremendous guilt for all those who died around him, and he survived. Felt tremendous sense of responsibility for his mother, having given her life so that he could be born and live. This led him to the kind of practice that was just right for him. Again, it's a very inspiring story, but it's not meant for you and I to imitate, but to find our own integrity and how we practice in our life, in our circumstances. So, realization. I continue to give myself to the practice more and more. Tangen Roshi was very strict with me. It was taking me a long time. He's talking about full enlightenment. He's had experiences along the way here. And Harada Roshi would not accept it. We tend to work differently. And in fact, Yasutani Roshi tended to work, in my understanding, closer to the way we work here. That is, if you have a glimpse in your practice that gives you enough traction to begin working on so-called subsequent koans, then we begin taking up the koan curriculum. And my faith in that curriculum is that as you proceed sincerely along through the koan curriculum, that initial glimpse will broaden and deepen over years as we learn to live it. To me, this is the essence of a lay practice. We learn to live it, to begin integrating and seeing something beyond our own self-centeredness and beginning to work with that. If you just enough to begin working the curriculum, I trust that the curriculum, sincerely undertaken, will make a difference in the long run. And it seems that Yasutani Roshi seems to have had a similar view. I know Eiken Roshi spoke about, personally, he claimed he never had any big experience. And he only began working on, well, not initially, he didn't have that experience. He began working on koans after 20 years of practice, just keeping at it. And he matured into one of the most refined and exquisite teachers of our time. So there are many ways. We each have to find our way, and of course the teacher's job is to help us do that. Not to force us into a mold, but try, given the teacher's personality and their experience, to find a way that will be beneficial to who you are and how you can go furthest in your own understanding and living it. So, in any case, Harada Roshi would not accept anything from Tangen Roshi. I probably would have accepted his first experience right off the bat. But, you know, that's me. So, it was taking me a long time. He continued pushing, refusing to recognize my experience. Any experience that was not thoroughgoing. That's a very high standard. It's like, no, I won't accept anything but full enlightenment. And he's saying, you can do that now. And he kept rejecting anything that wasn't that. So, again, I mentioned in last week's Teisho, being really gifted in practice really might mean the same thing as being really motivated in practice. And Tangen was a very motivated person given his life circumstances, his karma. So to go on, I made my final resolution to break through. This time I would break through during the next session or die. I was really serious about it. I knew it came down to this last session. Practicing with all my might during that session, the days were passing in life or death practice. It must have been the 7th day of session. I can never forget that morning as I continued to sit, unaware that the Doksan bell had been sounded. Unaware that the Doksan bell had been sounded. I was sitting absorbed in the samadhi of one doing, unaware of my surroundings. The senior monk at that time was very sharp, the Tanto. He must have moved through the Zendo toward me very quietly. The Zendo was practically empty, I later realized, as everyone had run to Doksan. And we don't do Doksan rushes here, but in our growing up, many of us in Zen, there was indeed the Doksan rush. The bell would ring, and it was a horse race. Totally competitive. People got trampled. People got leapt over. It was like do or die. Fortunately, those days have passed. And now it's simply you get up, and we have small size groups. You get up and you simply walk to Doksan. The difference, one difference here at least, is that, let's say during the week, but even in Sesshin, I've made up my mind that everyone who's coming gets in. One of the competitive aspects of Sesshin has often been, if you don't get there first, you may never get in. Never. In whole Sesshin, unless the monitor makes special efforts to get you in. So that created a very competitive atmosphere, which was really counterproductive for the Western psyche. We have to learn to get along with one another. That's our big challenge. So by removing the odds that you might not get into Doksan, then you get up and you walk and you'll get in. You get in the line and you'll get in. With Eiken Roshi, I remember coming from Rochester being so shocked at Sesshin in Hawaii. There'd be a time for Doksan, they'd announce it. Ding, ding, ding. Some people would get up and they'd walk out of the Zendo. And then ding-a-ding-a-ding, a couple more people would get up and walk out of the Zendo. Then finally there'd be an announcement. last call for Doksan, and like somebody would get up and straighten their cushions and walk slowly out of and it was like a shock. It was like having cold water dumped on you after all those years in Rochester. And I realized it doesn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be monastic style if you're a lay person. So it was really important and helpful to me to see that there are other ways of doing serious practice. I'm very grateful to Eiken Roshi for those experiences. In any case, and I'm grateful to Kapleau-Roshi for all those experiences. They all were important, and in some ways I have to accept right for me at the time. So, and for any of us who went through those things. So, the Zendo was practically empty. I later realized this. Everyone had run to Doksan. The Tanto tapped my shoulder very gently. Just a light touch, but a touch with a vast resonance. My mind opened. Even a gentle touch of encouragement can be received, can resonate utterably, as it did for me that morning. I flew to Doksan boldly and surely, just naturally, differently from any other time before. Up until then, if I went into Doksan and tried to say anything, Roshi would immediately ring his bell. But this time, I just glided in. And Dayan Roshi breathed in deeply, swallowing me up. He stared into my eyes fiercely. For the first time, a half smile appeared on his face. That's so great. For the first time, a half smile appeared on his face. That time I didn't have to hear a bell ringing. Instead, my teacher said, "Let's check you." My responses were spontaneous, uncontrived. So he began the checking questions on Mu at that point. So interesting. For the first time, I have smile. Anyway. That was when he verified my understanding. At last, moderate understanding, he said. So Japanese. After all this, he goes, moderate understanding. Yeah, don't let him get a swelled head. And then he added, at last. Moderate understanding, at last. I was so fortunate to be able to practice under a teacher so strict and so exacting. A teacher who had himself profoundly done the practice of Shakyamuni Buddha and profoundly experienced the teaching of the Buddha, and that is certainly true. That night, I did not go to evening Doksan. I was in the temple office as I had a duty there. I was so filled with pure happiness that I couldn't sleep. But I might have been dozing off and on in a state of wakeful sleep. I didn't know if I was dreaming or not when my own mother, whom I had never seen, came to me. From behind, she wrapped me in her arms and took my hand in hers. Together, we rose into the sky. Flying through the sky, I could feel the cold air on my cheeks. My mother was like an angel. As we flew, she communicated this to me, though not in words, but through her life. I am very glad. I am so glad. If I had not been ripened and matured my practice at the end of that session, so that Roshi could verify my understanding and confirm that I had broken through to his satisfaction, I would not have been alive that night. I had made the final determination. I believe that to my mother, the most important thing was not that I had had Satori. It's true, it wasn't just a kensho, it wasn't just a glimpse. It was Satori. Not a glimpse of selfless nature, it was much deeper. But it wasn't that was what she was so happy about. She was happy that I had not lost my life. I believe she was expressing her deep wish that I would be protected. I'm very glad. I'm so glad. A mother's mind is universal. After that session, my world was transformed. All stingy grasping fell away. All distinctions melted away. I continued to practice as Tangen Roshi instructed me, but now, even if I wanted to look away, I could no longer do so. I just continued my practice. It's interesting, isn't it? He didn't go, well, I've got it. Now I can forget about this practice. He continued to practice. The practice is endless. The depths we're capable of are endless. It's practice realization, practices on, but it's no longer self-willed, it's no longer forced. It's the expression of your actual life. It's ordinary. It's who you are. Why wouldn't you want to be aware? Why wouldn't you want to be compassionate? Why wouldn't you want to not be isolated? It's who we are. I knew true peace, that all is well. There is no inside, no outside, all is one all-encompassing one. This truth that I was able to accept and receive holds true, remains steady anytime, anywhere, wherever I walk on this wide, wide planet. This truth is universal. Wherever you find yourself, there is only this one truth. Now I've told you the story of my experience in Zen practice, but there is a danger here. The danger is that you might get the discouraging idea that my story and experience were too dramatic and special, and that you yourself could never hope to experience anything like it. This is not true. I just did the one and only thing I was told to do. I did it to the best of my ability. You cannot do what you cannot do, but you can do this one thing to your utmost. Regardless of what I did in my practice, the key remains the same for everyone. Complete sincerity. That's the key. You're you. You're not him. You're not me. But complete sincerity in your practice. You must give your all. But of course, it depends on your life and your circumstances, what that all is, what that all looks like. Maybe it's taking a breath and letting everything go when the phone rings. Hello, and give your all. Let everything fall away into that call, into that hello. But it's really tasting your tea. Really. Can I even tell you what this tea tastes like? The mysteries of our life are with us every moment. How to be open to this with complete sincerity all the time. That is a real challenge, but it doesn't have to be forceful, and it doesn't have to be rigid, and it doesn't have to be formal. But it has to be sincere. And there'll be plenty of failures and mistakes along the way. You must give your all, holding on to nothing. You must become your practice, and that is key, isn't it? We face that again and again in Doksan. You must become your practice. Sit there thinking or trying to figure out an answer. Never works. You must become that koan, that point. Just like you become that hello when you answer the phone. So from my own experience, I can say to you, if you set out to do it, it will be done. If you don't, it won't be done. When something isn't done, it's because you didn't resolve to do it. Yes and no. Yes and no. Roshi Kapleau used to say, if it's yes, then say yes. If it's no, then say no. If you don't know, then say, I don't know. complete sincerity works in all three versions. In a particular conversation I had with Tangen Roshi some years ago, he quoted the Duke of Marlborough, a great quote from the Duke of Marlborough, who said, "I am fully resolved to win or lose." We'll stop here and recite our great vows for all.